Let me share two things. Philippians chapter 2, verse 13. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purpose. And then those very personal words of Paul in verse 17. But even if I be poured out like a drink offering on the sacrificing surface coming from your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with you all, so that you too may be glad and rejoice with me. Years ago, Viktor Frankl made this statement. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the people who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offered sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. In any given set of circumstances. Choosing one's attitude. God has given us His Spirit. And in giving us His Spirit, He has given us a measure of love, a measure of kindness that goes way beyond our capacity. And He gives us the ability to choose our attitude in spite of our circumstances. Watching a show this last few months called The Brigade. I don't know if you caught it. I love these kind of shows. 10 people who were asked to go on a trip, leaving Castlegar in British Columbia, ending up in York Factory. They did it by canoe, by different canoes, by hiking. They had no GPS. They just had each other. And they were given 28 days to do this long trip. And of course these shows like to show attitude, don't they? And they focus on bad attitude. But there was one young fellow, and he always had a cheery word. And I would watch the other members of the brigade, and sometimes they would snarl. And they would say, oh, he's always happy. And they could be going through the worst of times, and he would help other people carry their load. And he would give them an encouraging word. At the end of the trip, when they all arrived, all of them said, you were naturally our leader. Your attitude carried us through. You helped us in so many ways. The difference of an attitude. In Philippians 4 and 5 it says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Paul, the apostle, when he writes a letter, he writes it with intent, with purpose. He wants to share valuable things, valuable lessons. Several things that he shares in this letter. First, he wants to thank the Philippians. Thank them for what they've given to him. This is twice now that they've provided for him while he's been in Rome. And he wants to thank them. And the important thought around this is that regardless of Paul's situation, regardless of his struggles, Paul wants to say thank you. He shows gratitude in spite of his challenges. Then he wants to encourage them. He sees that the Christians in Philippi are going through a tough time. And Paul remembers that even though he's going through a really tough time, others are too. And so regardless of the distance, regardless of the difference of opinions and perspectives, he sees that they're all suffering together. And it's a reminder, don't let our own situations blind us from the pain and the need of other people. And he wants to remind them to live in unity. And the path to humility is through, well, the path to unity, he calls them to unity because the path to unity is through humility. And he knows that the church isn't perfect. They have their quarrels, they have their disagreements, they have their different perspectives. There are even false teachers among them who are trying to steer them away from the truth. But he calls them back to unity again and again. And then he calls them to service. Paul says, remember this, Jesus Christ gave his life to abolish death. And he's called us to follow him, to follow in his steps, and to serve him and to serve others. Jesus gave his life. And you know what? We are a cause we're dying for, according to God. And he calls us to give our lives for a cause worth dying for. You know, there's so many people these days that are willing to give up everything for success. As one person said, they give first-class allegiance to second-class causes. I remember the story about a man who gave everything to climb the ladder of success, only to find out that when he got to the top, he was leaning against the wrong wall. When we don't include God in our plan, we end up going nowhere. So what are we committed to? The question we ask ourselves from time to time, and we need to consider all the time, is, what cause am I giving my life to? Will it stand the test of time? There's an old expression for Christians, will it stand the test of fire? What are we giving our lives to? The best thing that I can invest my life in is something that will outlast me. It's something greater than my mind can conceive and my hands can build. Something greater than me. You see, serving others, this is a fundamental principle that Jesus laid down. Many, many times he reminded them while he was here on earth. Mark chapter 10, verse 45. He tells his disciples this, not to be served, but to serve. Not to be served, but to serve. It's nice to be served. I love going to a restaurant, sitting down and being served. And I can become very fussy when I'm being served. I'm paying the bill after all. But in reality, in life, God calls us to serve. Not to be served. Mark chapter 10 and verse 43, it says this. Jesus said, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. We want our lives to matter, don't we? We want our lives to have significance. We want our lives to be important. And people chase after so many things so that their life can have meaning. They run after promotions. They seek and long for leadership positions. so that they can be seen and they can be thought of as somebody that is important and that matters. And people do this in the church as well too. But our purpose is to find what God wants us to do. Our purpose is to take the gifts and the talents and the skills and the abilities that God has given us and to use them to bless others, to build others up, not to build up ourselves in their eyes, but to build others up. And there are so many blessings that come from serving that you can't get any other way. It's true. Let me share a few of them with you. For example, do you know that when we serve, we experience God working. And we can't get this blessing in any other way. When you're doing something, and you're asking God, God bless this, and God, I'm following you, and then God starts blessing it, and He starts doing things, and sometimes you sit back and go, wow, it really worked. I've actually done that a few times. Wow, this really works. God, I didn't have any idea. We get to see God doing things. When Jesus was here on earth, in the Bible it says that in John chapter 2, He went about doing good and doing miracles. Here's a thought. We will actually experience and see miracles. Bible camp coming up this summer. You guys are going to see miracles. You're going to see lives changed. But in order to get there, you're going to have to serve, and it's not going to be easy. What do you say? Ministry is messy? But there's a blessing, isn't there?
Kids are working.
And then serving others brings us joy and peace. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 10 and 11 talks about that. When we serve others in Jesus' name, we're worshiping God. It's a form of worship. It's a way of expressing our gratitude to God. And He gives us joy and He gives us peace. And then here's another one too. Serving others makes us part of a fraternity. You see, we surround ourselves with people who want the same goal and will bless and encourage us as we're serving. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. Serving builds up our faith. Paul talked about that in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. I'm throwing these at you because, well, it's your work. You got to look these up. Serving builds up our faith. Have you ever been stretched in your faith? And the only way you get stretched in your faith is when you say yes. Somebody comes along and says, will you do this? I've never done that before. Yeah. And it stretches us. It takes us outside of our comfort zone. And it builds our faith. Serving is good for, I put it this way, the mind, body, and soul. This is a reality that people know when they're serving, but there was also a study made. And a study that showed that volunteering blesses the volunteer even more than those you're serving. It's a reality. It blesses our mind, our body, our soul. It makes us feel good. Sometimes when I talk to people and they're feeling, they feel alone, they feel isolated, I say, well, get out. Do something. Help somebody. Well, I don't know. Well, look around you. Get involved. Do something. Serving makes us more like Jesus. There's an old chorus we used to sing, make me more like thee, Jesus. You know that chorus? What is the second part of that? Give me a heart that's filled with love. And make me more like thee. You see, serving other people shifts the focus off ourselves. It puts it first and foremost on God and then on others around us. Here's a thought. Self-esteem. It doesn't come from salary. It doesn't come from status. It comes from service. God says if you want to be great, learn to be the servant of all. Do you remember the speech that was given a number of years ago by John F. Kennedy? Some of us were around to hear it. January the 20th, 1961. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Now I want to share something. See, this is called servant leadership. And it didn't start with the speech of John F. Kennedy in 1961. Nor did it start with the dissertation of Robert Greenleaf in 1970, although he made a lot of sense. Servant leadership. When did it start? It started when God created the world. It started when God created the world. And He created all of these beautiful yellow flowers. He made this available for us. Blair was sharing about that earlier on. The creation of the world. This is for us. The light, the dark, the flowers, the rain, the sun, the rain, the dark, the rain. You see it repeating. He did this for us. And it was so clearly demonstrated in the life of Jesus. When God came to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many. Robert Greenleaf made a good statement in his dissertation when he said this. Listen to this. Traditional leadership involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at the top of the pyramid. The servant leader is different. They focus on growth and well-being of others and the community they belong to. That's servant leadership. And we can develop this, but here's a sad reality. Anybody can be taught the principles of servant leadership. The unfortunate fact is that not everybody will practice them. It's a reality. But here's some principles to follow regarding servant leadership. First, being humble enough to accept our place in the overall scheme of things. Not grabbing after power, but serving just for the sake of serving. It says the greatest, Jesus said, must be the least, must be the servant, must be the slave of all. When Judy and I were in Vancouver, we had 200 staff. And I felt like I was being run off my feet half the time because you're trying to help people. And when we started off, we were helping people all over the place. And after a while, as they started to grow, the ministry started to grow and it took off. Why? Because I was great? Oh, forget about that. I never was. Because we enable people to grow and to develop, and then they just did naturally what they could. The ministry grew. But we were the servants of others. And our overall place might have been as leaders, but we were servants. Listen to and value other people's perspectives. Be willing to show sympathy regardless of your own circumstances. Offer healing through words and actions. Offer to build up others and the church, and to be used in whatever humble way that is fit. And then the last one should be first, think. Just think. Think before you say. Think before you do. Just stop and think. And remember this, we develop good habits, not so much in the big things, but in the everyday events of life. That's how it happens. It says that character is revealed in crisis, but it is built in the little everyday things of life. Let me share this story with you about servant leadership. Two different stories. A very well-known and respected speaker is invited to talk at a large gathering. It's a rainy and wet day. It's just a week ago. He's walking down the long corridor, and in front of him, there's a coat strewn right into his path. So he walks up, and he kicks the coat off to the side, walks up onto the platform, and gives his speech. When he's finished, he walks back down, the coat is back in his path, and he kicks it over again, and continues on. What do you think people heard?
The kicking of the coat.
Attitude. Attitude. Another speaker, leader of a very large ministry, is making his way from the hotel to the conference center to speak. He was invited to the Bahamas. I've been longing for an invitation. Unlike everybody else in the hotel, who are very casually dressed, fitting the temperature, he has dark pants, white shirt, tie, very formal. Kind of looks like one of the porters in the hotel. He's in the elevator. Door opens up. Fashionably dressed woman walks in, looks at him, puts her suitcases down in front of him, and stands off to the side. They get down to the lobby. The door opens up. She stands there and looks at him. He reaches down, picks up the suitcases, follows her out to her taxi, puts the suitcases in her taxi, and off she goes. His staff is very upset. They're very flustered. Why didn't you ask us to do this? We would have helped you. Well, she was expecting me to do this, and I didn't want to disappoint her, but I am rather upset. Well, what are you upset about? She didn't even give me a tip. But what he did was spoken of throughout the entire convention. Actions speak louder than words. And attitude reveals itself in the little things. Generally speaking, there are two types of attitudes. There are those who hide away and avoid change because they're upset. There are those who are motivated when they see they need to change. And there are those who couldn't care less. Did I say two? It takes courage to confront our attitudes. We see as Christians, as followers of Christ, we have the power within us. It's available to us that can help us. He is available. And I'm going to repeat something that I said last week. We have the right as Christians. What rights am I talking about? We have the right to be treated as our Savior was treated. He was despised, rejected, familiar with pain, punished, pierced, crushed, and falsely accused. We have the right to be treated as the one whose name we bear. We also have the right to stand up against injustice, to stand for the truth, whether it is popular or not, and to stand alone if needed at times. Martin Luther King stated, "Cowardice asks, is it safe? Vanity asks, is it popular? Conscience asks, is it right?" We have the right to proclaim the good news to the poor, to comfort the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. We have the right to stand up for the right, to do what is right, even if it is painful. I remind you again, verse 8. While living as a man, Jesus humbled himself even more by being fully obedient to God, even when it meant his death on a cross. Jesus is our best model for leadership. Jesus' actions always were revealing his words. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, it says this, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Zig Ziglar, I like that name. He's an actual person. He's an American author, businessman, and a Christian. He stated this, "It's true that integrity alone won't make you a leader, but without integrity, you'll never be one." So let me share from Proverbs 21:3. "To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." Proverbs 28:6. "Better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse." Doing what is right will not always be safe or popular, but it remains the right thing to do. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, we read these words, "Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary." How can I better serve you? Beautiful little chorus. How can I better serve thee, Lord, thou who hast done so much for me? Faltering and weak my labor has been. Oh, that my life may speak for thee.